If I show you these 3 animals and I ask you to imagine you are an animal in an evolution simulation that wants to mate, which one would you choose? Or to rephrase the question, which one do you think is chosen more often? The answer is of course none, because there is no choice mechanism implemented. Let's figure out how we could make that work so that we can have something like this. For those of you new here, this is evolution simulation game The Sapling, my solo indie game project. It has 2 game modes. There are scenarios tasking you to design an ecosystem that meets specific requirements, but there's also a sandbox where you can build your own algae, plants and animals, turn on random mutations and see how they evolve. In nature, bright colors are typical for males. The idea here is that females are not available for mating as often because they might be pregnant or already caring for a young animal, so when they are available they have more choice. Males have more competition as a result of this, so they evolve brighter colors to stand out. Only in species that have much more females than males you typically see females with bright colors. I say bright colors, but what I really mean is at least 2 colors and a very high contrast between them. But in the sapling so far, animals could have only 1 color and any skin patterns were just the same but slightly darker. Really introducing a second color was a challenge, because for the animals I was using Unity's default shader, which allowed me to procedurally change the color of an object as a whole, but not the colors of individual patterns on top of that. But, long-time watchers know, I have a custom grass shader under my belt. So I now had the confidence to try writing my own animal skin shader. And I had the bulk of what I wanted done within an hour. And I had planned a whole week for it. It works like this. For each animal that the user creates, a procedural texture is generated that matches the body plan of the animal. In the old situation, this texture was treated as the grayscale version to be given its final color on the fly. In the new situation, the textures look like this. The red channel in the texture stores the skin pattern, like spots or stripes, and the green channel stores the skin type, like feathers. This makes it possible to recolor skin type and skin pattern individually in the shader. For example, this pixel in the procedural texture has a high value in its red channel, meaning it should be whatever secondary color the player has chosen to form stripes. But this pixel has a high value in its green channel, meaning that it should be darker to form feathers. And because I wrote this shader myself, I have way more control over how the animals look, and I can, for example, calculate how far a pixel is from the beginning or end of the animal. So I can have skin patterns like this one, where the strength of the second color is determined based on the distance to the end, or this one, where it is calculated based on the distance to the center. As an aside, I can of course also take the other axis and calculate for each pixel the distance to the spine of the animal. This is a material for debugging, where it starts black and gets lighter the further away it gets from the spine, but it looks a lot like counter shading, which is the phenomenon that animals are lighter at their belly. It's an effect I've wanted ever since seeing this art by Red Slug. This is how it looks in the editor, which might seem quite subtle, until I turn it off and you see how much shade is actually being countered. Anyway, to be considered attractive, animals should have 2 colors that are far from each other on the color spectrum or far from each other on the brightness spectrum. There is now a new attractiveness statistic that indicates how well you are doing. But as the initial question already gave away more or less, attractiveness is determined not only by colors but also by body parts. A number of existing body parts will get an attractiveness statistic, like all horns and antlers, but I'm also adding lots and lots of new body parts with this purpose specifically, inspired by current animals, extinct animals, and speculative evolution projects. In fact, I had so many ideas for attractive body parts, in particular decorative feathers, that I decided to group them like I did with fins, which change shape based on whether you put them on the back, on the sides, or at the end. For fins, I did it because I didn't want to force the player to learn that tail fins should go at the end, side fins on the side, etc. But at the time I did not feel 100% happy with this decision, because I felt I was taking control away from the players who actually did want to put a tail fin on the side for some reason. But then I played relaxing castle building game Tiny Glade, which takes a radically different approach. For example, if your path touches a wall, it becomes a door. If you put lampposts near a wall, they become hanging lamps. If you put your window on the roof, it becomes a dormer. And if you put 2 windows opposite each other, a washing line appears. My personal hero Will Wright, creator of The Sims, SimCity and Spore, has mentioned on several occasions that he thinks about his simulation games as toys, and Tiny Glade takes this idea to the extreme. Instead of allowing the player to build whatever ugly thing they had in mind, it takes control away from the player in exchange for a tool that is interesting to use. To my surprise, this makes the game really fun to play. It feels like you're discovering Easter egg after Easter egg. So that's why I'm now fully embracing location-specific body part shapes. And quite a lot of the new stuff has 3 variations. One for the top, one for the side and one for the tail. Annoyingly, I almost always could only come up with only 2 similar looking birds, so I had to make up a third one. For example, cockatoo, rooster, fantasy animal, spatula tail, peacock, and fantasy animal, hummingbird, astrapia, and fantasy animal. I also even retrofitted existing body parts. For example, if you put these horns on the back, it becomes a clubtail, and for these horns you will get a thagomizer. There will also be a few body parts where the attractive value will not be immediately clear until they start making noise, like the rattle we saw before, and this abdomen with vibrating timbals, inspired by cicadas. This, by the way, also marks the first time animals will be able to make noise without their mouth. Sound will therefore also be visualized differently as a growing but fading sphere, inspired by games like Sky. Another group of attractive body parts will be surprisingly lightweight and aerodynamic compared to the others, but that's only because they can be moved out of the way in some way or the other. They will need a display instinct though, for example when they see a potential mate, before the extra attractiveness is unlocked. And of course this body part type will also be resizable, which is why scary and sexy fit so well within one update. The larger you make an attractive body part, the more attractive it will be, but it will also be heavier and less aerodynamic. Perhaps the biggest challenge when it comes to resizing body parts is how to communicate to the player how exactly resizing affects the statistics. As a first step, I'm adding more unity in the UI. And there weren't that many statistics in the game, I had a separate icon for each statistic, but I've been gradually moving away from that approach, because 20 different icons in such a small space was a bit overwhelming. Inspired by Mario Kart of all places, I've slowly but steadily replaced a lot of statistics with simple dots. I'm paying with personality, because this looks a lot more boring, but I get readability in return. You can now see at a glance what are the advantages and disadvantages of a body part and how it compares to others. Important for this system is that more dots always means better, so some statistics had to be inverted, which explains the weird lightweight statistic instead of just weight, but overall I feel it's an improvement. But now these same 5 dots also need to communicate what will happen if we resize the body part. To make it a bit more concrete, a dot can now mean not 1 but 3 things. Most dots are always there, whether you resize it or not. Some dots will appear when you increase the size, like a body part being more attractive or a leaf catching more sunlight if you make it bigger. And some dots will disappear when you increase the size, like a body part becoming less lightweight. So how do I visually keep apart these 3 options? I've really tried everything, like different colors for the dots, different shapes for the dots, but I felt all of it was just making the whole thing look messy and not intuitive. In the end, I settled on a system where you can see the slots where the dots go. Fixed dots are brown, dots that will go away if you increase the size are white, and for dots that will appear if you increase the size, it shows an empty slot. The big advantage of this design, as compared to my other attempts, is that new players can completely ignore it. You can still always count the dots and have a good idea of what a body part is good at. To teach the more experienced players how this UI should be interpreted, I added a mouse over effect for body parts, where you can see the dots change as you change the size. So, who would be chosen? Of course, now the answer is no, it still doesn't work yet, because these things cannot walk. To prevent players just putting every beneficial body part on their animal, the game has had a weight system already since the Fight and Flight update. One of the many things I've learned from reading every review of the game everywhere ever is that this weight system might be too strict. Apparently it's quite a negative experience for the more creative player if they spend 30 minutes creating their dream animal only to discover that it cannot walk. So from now on, adding more legs will allow the animal to carry more weight in exchange for speed. This also nicely solves another case where the visual appearance of an animal didn't affect the simulation, because so far you could add or remove legs as often as you'd like. Now it determines how many other body parts the animal can carry. However, if you have an animal that has the strength to carry a lot of weight, that still doesn't mean it has the space. In the animal builder you still have only 2 slots per torso part, so if I'd want to create an animal with 4 eyes, ears and horns, it would look something like this. I need to completely redo something here. My answer? Subslots, which appear once you put a body part somewhere. It's quite simple from the player's perspective, or at least I hope so, but under the hood this makes the situation a lot more complex, because besides direction, the game now also needs to store which subslot a body part occupies. This required a lot of rewiring all over the game, like the animation system, the save load system, the system that calculates an animal's statistics, the random mutation system, you name it. Okay, so I've implemented attractiveness in various ways. I've added resizing of body parts, I've adapted the weight system, I allow much more body parts. Can we now finally answer our question? Turns out no, because it rarely happens that a female animal becomes pregnant and there are multiple fertile animals around and of the correct sex. Because obviously the whole attractiveness system doesn't work if the female doesn't choose between at least 2 mates. It took a long time of studying the simulation and running experiments, but I finally arrived at a solution. The main insight came when I realized that most females do reproduce multiple types within their lifetime. Combine this with the fact that many real animals can store sperm for longer amounts of time, and you've got a working system. Females will simply only mate again if the new mate is more attractive than the previous one. So, fertile animals of the sapling, be ready for this drop-dead gorgeous hottie. Next time I will go into the ultimate scary life form. Life that feasts on the dead. Today our first bonus body part is this spine sail, mostly inspired by the Dimetrodon, although apparently it also still exists in some chameleons. If you put it on the side you get frills, initially inspired by the Dilophosaurs in Jurassic Park. For completeness, real Dilophosaurs didn't have these frills. But here again, there is a living animal that does have them, the frilled lizard. The second one is the sunbeam caterpillar, which extends hair-like tentacles if you use its display action. In real life, this is mostly to scare off predators. In the game, you can also use this body part to increase attractiveness.